Hello, I'm Dr. Maury Markman from City of Hope, and I want to continue our conversation about cancer clinical trials. And how I ended the conversation last time was a provocative question of why should patients participate in clinical trials? What is the benefit, not at a societal level, and certainly we generate data, generalizable data, helps other patients, but for a particular patient in front of you or me today in the office setting, why should that patient consider clinical trials? Now, what has been stated by many, in fact, certain organizations, which I will not necessarily go into here, that the best cancer care is provided in clinical trials. Pretty strong statements. Participate in clinical trial, that's your best possible care. Well, the end of last year, two papers, and others have discussed this, but two peer-reviewed papers were reported that challenged this notion. And they based it on data that they looked at in terms of results of clinical trials, some studies that are particularly randomized patients to some type of a standard of care versus an investigative agent, and challenged the notion that participation in the trials actually resulted in better outcomes. There was very little difference between this. So patient went to all that time, that effort, their family as well. There wasn't really a difference. And therefore, the question is, what would be the evidence be that, in fact, there is a benefit to patients for participating in clinical trials? Now, it's a very provocative question. One could interpret this as meaning, wow, there is not necessarily value here. Again, the time, the effort required, potential additional toxicity associated with trials. I, however, would challenge that conclusion. First of all, randomized trials are only one component of the phase of the trials that we perform in oncology. Phase 2 trials that look at directly at an agent or a combination regimen, they may show enormous benefit for individual patients participating in the trial, which you wouldn't be captured because there's not a comparison to anything in that. Even phase 1 studies today, where you're looking at a well-defined targeted agent. Classic example of that is imatinib in chronic myelocytic leukemia. Essentially, all patients who participate in the first phase 1 trial experience enormous benefit. Now, all the examples of phase 1 trials certainly don't fall into that category, but increasingly we are learning how to deliver the right patient, the right drug to the right patient based upon abnormalities that have been defined by molecular testing. The point to be made is it's not just the randomized trials that we need to compare, but ask the question of the potential benefit to the patient. But I would add to that, in fact, data demonstrating the randomized controlled trials don't show major differences between the control arm and the experimental arm is actually reassuring, not discouraging. Why? Because of the critical importance, in my opinion, of the ethical concept of equipoise. If it turned out that we showed that the experimental arms of clinical trials overall were so much better than control arms, then you might ask the question, in fact, you should ask the question, why were those studies conducted? If we were that certain, if there was that much evidence, why should a randomized trial have been conducted? Why should a doctor have advised a patient or encouraged a patient to go on trials if the experimental arms are always so much better? In fact, if we don't know, if we are learning, if we can honestly say to our patients and ourselves that we don't know the benefits, if one is better than another, then it is, from an equipoise perspective, reasonable, appropriate to suggest a possible clinical trial to a patient. You are not asking a patient to do something that you don't think is of value, potential value to them. Turns out, overall, obviously, some trials will show improvement, some trials will show not improvement. That's how we learn. But we are being honest with ourselves, honest with our patients in this situation. So again, the absence of overwhelming benefit for people who participated in randomized trials in terms of improved survival is not discouraging. We obviously always want to do better, but the fact is that randomized trial concept, that ethical concept of being honest and open and truthful to patients about what we don't know, I think is actually supported by the conclusions here. All of this being said, we still have to answer the question or attempt to answer the question, why should a patient participate in a clinical trial, cancer clinical trial? And I'm going to address that question next time we meet. Thank you.